So this is the Polarex's dew shield. It's an enormous thing. So it's about probably an inch larger than the lens itself, and its function is just to stop the lens fogging up during use. It's something that I find quite interesting, comparing the dew shield to this viewfinder over here. The first is that if you look carefully, the viewfinder is a Unitron viewfinder rather than the Polarex viewfinder. And I actually asked the previous owner whether he was sure that it came from the 6-inch Polarex, and he said yes. So what's happened here is at some point someone's done mix and match on the telescope. And this kind of makes sense as well, because if you look at the viewfinder here, it's in pretty good nick. There are a few scuffs and so on. It still has the past optical QC mark from the makers. But if you look at the dew shield is just covered with chips and scratches. It's been subject to a lot more hard work than the viewfinder. And so I'm guessing that what's happened is that at some stage, either the viewfinder has been replaced, or else the viewfinder has been stored separately for the dew shield. Okay, so this paint is too far gone to repair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip this off using paint stripper initially, and then a bit of wet and dry to get back to bare metal, and then resurface. So that was way harder than I was expecting. The paint stripper just wouldn't touch the finish which was on the dew shield, which is kind of a surprise because it had so many little imperfections and areas where paint had just flaked off. I was expecting the paint to come away relatively easily, but despite hours and hours of hand sanding, in the end I had to use one of the little Zito multi-tool sanders with a foam pad on to get down to bare metal in some places, not everywhere. I didn't want to take it completely down to bare metal because there's a fair bit of texture on the surface, and I want the paint to key well to that. As I was doing this, something else interesting occurred to me. Looking at the pattern of striations on this, I'd assumed that this would have been an extruded tube, but I think it's actually rolled. So you see how the striations are going this way, and also that there are these raised areas here. So I think this has been a rolled tube, and the main tube looks similar as well. Inside, you can see that in addition to the end where the lens cell sits, having threading on it, the actual body of the dew shield has got threading on it as well. Not quite as pronounced as where the lens cell fits. And I suspect this is another way of cutting down on reflections on the inside. So it's quite a sophisticated treatment. Anyhow, this has been washed with detergent liquid now, and I'm going to give it a good degrease and then put some etch primer on it. This is the scope's main tube. It's 2.2 meters long. I've got a couple of closures, top and bottom, just to stop rubbish getting in the minute. Aluminium, I think probably extruded, a bunch of what look like dye marks on the front. Diameter of the tube is a little bit over 6 inches, and the thickness of the aluminium is about 2 millimeters as far as I can tell. So I'm going to give this a good sand down, clean it up, degrease it, put some etch primer on it, and get a surface primer on it. This is my spray booth. It's almost impossible in an environment like this to keep rubbish off the items you're spraying if you're doing it in the open. So I'm working underneath it's actually my bathroom. I've got a Kara heater in here at the moment, just warming these guys up because I'm about to put some spray putty on them. So the edge primer and the surface primer went on quite nicely. There are a couple of imperfections. I'll put a little bit of blade putty on this to fix it up, but it's pretty smooth now. Now looks a lot lighter than it did before I started cleaning it up. The dew shield turned out nicely as well. So all that banding has disappeared now, and it looks nice and uniform. I'll give this a coat of spray putty as well, and sand it down So I get a nice uniform finish over this, and they should both look quite nice when they're done. I've changed my mind again about this tube. Actually, I think I found like what looks like a seam running along it. So I suspect it probably was rolled rather than extruded. So this is going to pick up quite strongly with the gloss paint I'm going to put on here. So I think I'll probably try and level it out with some blade putty. So this is the finished dew shield. I put 3 or 4 spray coats of white enamel on it, and a couple of coats of clear. And unfortunately the clear, well, you can't really see it in the video here, the clear is a little bit orange peeled. I should have taken some video of it before I put the clear on there, but I can probably fix that with a bit of wet and dry. A few high spots on there, but again, a razor blade and some wet and dry will fix that up. So that's kind of nice. The scope came up nicely as well. The seam on it has disappeared now underneath the paint. So I think I'm going to call that a win. It might not be automotive quality, but it's pretty good. I think that at the end of the day, it's about protecting the aluminium and providing a kind of uniform finish as well. I'm going to give it a couple of months before I put the rings on it so that the enamel hardens off completely. There's plenty of other stuff to do before I get to mounting it again. In particular, I need to work on the declination and the RA axis on the mount itself. Well, I thought I'd finished painting the main tube, but I discovered I'd made a little bit of an error. Sometimes I think these videos are actually how not to restore a historic telescope. So I taped up the ends when I was doing the painting to provide a margin so that I could put the lens cell and the focuser back on the tube without damaging the paint finish. So that's fine for the lens cell. And if this was the 4-inch guide scope, or indeed any 4-inch scope, it would have been fine as well. But on the 6-inch Polarex, of course, the focuser goes inside the tube and fits within the tube, not outside the tube. So I'm grinding back this margin here, and I'll just refinish it and repaint it, and use sandpaper to blend it in with the rest of the tube. So I feel a bit silly about that, but these things happen. This is the lens cell from the 6-inch tube. It's got a lot of this, I don't know what it is. It's almost like tape residue on it, but it seems to be just about everywhere. Unfortunately, there's also some paint loss on there as well. So I'm going to try and clean off this grey stuff first, and then we'll give it a few coats of satin black, and I think some clear to protect it, and hopefully it'll clean up quite nicely. The threads on the inside are fine. There's no corrosion on these nuts as well, so I'll just leave those alone. Maybe give them a little bit of a clear coat as well. I wonder what that was. It looks like something's been taped on there. Maybe the dew shield was taped on there, or had some double-sided tape on to hold it, and it's left that bit of residue there. Who knows? Anyhow, hopefully it'll clean up okay. That residue cleaned off the lens cell quite well. A bit of wax remover and some thinner was just enough to get it off. The finish though is in pretty poor shape underneath, and what I've decided to do is actually separate the two halves of the lens cell. The reason I want to do that is, you see that border there between the two halves. I think that's going to be a real problem if I try spraying them as one piece. The other thing that I want to do is on the inside, the threads for the lens cell have actually got a bit of muck in, which I didn't notice to start off with, so it'll be easier to clean that out as well. Okay, onwards and upwards. The lens cell holder has come up quite nicely. I've put the two parts back together again now, so nice even finish, and yeah, it looks pretty good. So the next thing to do is probably get the focuser up to the same sort of standard as well. At the moment it's a little bit dull, and needs a little bit of work. This is the visual back of the main tube. It's got a nice rack and pinion focuser with the zebra knobs on it. It also has a vernier for imaging as well. The support that sits inside the tube is actually a little bit dull, and it's got some paint scuffs on it. So I think I'm going to take this back with a little bit of wet and dry, and then repaint it before I reinstall it. That's come up very nicely. So the finish is very similar to the lens cell holder. It's nice, bright, even, and I think that'll look pretty good when it's reinstalled on the main tube. This is the beating heart of the 6-inch Polarex, the lens. So it's perfect. There's no disintegration of the coating on it anywhere. A few flecks of dust, but I can remove those. The retaining wing is actually not in particularly good shape. So there's been a characteristic corrosion around the fixings there. The lettering is dull and smeared in places. There's a little bit of some sort of residue on it as well. So I'm going to take it off. It's actually already had a few people had a go at it. If you can see, there's a little bit of marring on these screws. So I'm going to take it off and give it a bit of a clean up and a bit of a reno as well. Like very few people are ever going to see this, but I'm going to know it's there, and I want to have it pristine. So a bit of paint and some white acrylic smeared into the engraving has made a lot of difference to that. As I said, no one's going to see this, but I know it's there. I'm quite happy with the way that's come up. We have the complete optical train of the Polarex complete now. So we've got the 4-inch guide scope, the 2-inch finder, the astrograph, and the 6-inch scope itself, all together with the rings restored. So interesting thing that I noticed that there's some differences between the lenses, apart from the fact that the guide scope is Unitron, whereas the main scope and the other scopes are Polarex. The anti-reflective coatings are different. So if you look at the viewfinder, the 2-inch viewfinder, and the astrograph, they've got this quite attractive bluish kind of bloom to them, and that's from a magnesium fluoride anti-reflection coating. Okay, whereas the 6-inch scope and the Unitron manufactured 4-inch guide scope don't have any anti-reflective coating on. Interesting. So it's taken a fair old while to get to this point. I'm very happy to be here, but I'm still not quite there yet. I have to complete the restoration of the mount. We're getting there. There's the pier, a little bit of cosmetics on the mount head, and then we'll be there. But I am looking forward to using this thing, and we've got the planets coming up in the next few months, and hopefully I'll be ready for Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars.